After a successful decade run as a featured documentary, Eyes of the Mothman is now a podcast containing bonus information and, for the first time ever, the complete, unedited field interview tapes with eyewitnesses, experts, and those who were directly impacted by the Mothman incidents that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 1967. Although this podcast is meant to act as a historical record and an archive of the events that transpired, all material contained here is not for reproduction without the written consent by the copyright holder, Redline Studios, Incorporated. We are on episode 10 of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. This is dedicated to the interview we conducted with Dave Peyton, who was a journalist with the Herald Dispatch newspaper, publication from the years of 1965 to 2000. Dave specifically handled many of the UFO reports and cases that were going on in the Ohio River Valley area. And so we tracked him down to talk about all the UFO activity that's part of the story. You know, sometimes you forget how many layers there are to the story of Mothman, where it's not just a creature being seen. You look at all of the events surrounding this time period and this area. Now, if you go out to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, this is not a big town. You can walk the town in 10 minutes. You can walk the main street of the town in 10 minutes. Some people who are maybe newly introduced to the story might go, well, why are all these things, clamored together? Why isn't it just Mothman, this creature? It has to do with the geography and the timing of all these events. In this very small town, all of these things were happening at once. You have the Mothman story, you have the Silver Bridge collapse, you have Men in Black sightings, you have Indrid Cold, which we haven't even gotten into yet, and you have numerous UFO sightings. And one thing I remember, not just with Dave, but with anyone we interviewed about the topic of UFOs, everybody unanimously said that the UFO stories and cases and sightings trumped Mothman. What I was excited about interviewing Dave is that he was kind of a neutral party. He was not someone who was coming at us from, I saw a UFO over the Ohio River. He was someone who was fielding calls and stories on a neutral ground basis as a journalist for a long period of time out there. And so he was giving us his perspective on what people were coming to him with, sights and sounds, the varieties of craft that people were seeing. And, again, another educated person, spoke incredibly well, could put together a great soundbite for us for a documentary. And we interviewed him outside of the Iron Gate Grill, which was a nice restaurant at the edge of the main street there in town, where the shops and stores start to end and it becomes residential. The other interesting thing about that location, it is right at the foot of where the Silver Bridge once stood. So we were interviewing him kind of at that iconic location in town.
Well, I remember we had a limited lighting package when we went down there, and we were shooting at night, and it was a nice evening, and we were able to be in the garden area of the backyard of this restaurant, and they had I think they had almost like Christmas tree lights in the background, a little sparkly, out of focus kind of stuff. And we had a big old softbox type of thing to light him with. But it was nice to, like I said, we're doing so many talking head interviews that we didn't want all of them to be exactly the same and look the same. So we got an opportunity to shoot at night. I don't think we ever shot anybody else at night outside. Oh no, we did.
Jeff.
We did Jeff out by the Mothman statue. Yes. So that was another one of the kind of luxuries about shooting in those locales is that nobody cared. Nobody cared that we were setting up lights and running electrical lines and using their space. There's no permits. There's nobody stopping you and going, "What are you filming? What are you doing? Do you have, can I be in it?"
Yeah.
All the things that you always get. Oh, it was just kind of like the whole town was your
it's like you have
studio.
A movie set.
Yeah.
You have a back lot. What's funny is it's a night, it's like a Thursday or Friday night where people are out, drinking and enjoying themselves. But we're just by the nature of the town, we're in the middle of it, and it still just didn't didn't disrupt our shooting at all.
And there were definitely people at the bar. They lowered the radio for us, like the music. They lowered it so that we can have the interview. And we were out there for a good amount of time, and they didn't complain about having to lower their music for us.
Yeah. Another weird thing happened when we interviewed him that I did not remember until revisiting the raw tapes. Do you guys remember what happened when we were filming him?
Yes, there was a guy that was riding his motorcycle on the street, and he got into like an accident while we were filming the interview.
Do you remember this? 5 feet away from us.
Like in the back? Is he in the background?
He's not in the shot. He's just off frame. And I remember sitting there interviewing, Dave like here, and I can see over here what's happening. And a guy was on like a moped type thing.
Did we call 911?
We did.
Justin, I think, called 911.
He crashed. He was covered in blood. He was drunk. He was drunk driving a motorcycle.
I don't really remember.
And this was another kind of like, I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but just the idea of like, you're out in a remote area. Like I remember the guy crashed, had too much to drink, was bleeding on his face. And our immediate reaction was like, we're going to call and get you some help. And this is like, no, I'm just going to walk home. I don't want to get a DUI. But like the fact that it was almost like, no, I do this every week.
Yeah.
And I think by the time the cops came,
he left,
and then
and nobody cared. They weren't like,
told the ambulance they didn't have to come.
They're like, yeah, it'll be fine.
We'll just follow the trail of blood on the way home.
But yeah, that interrupted our, I think in the middle of the interview, I'm just like, so tell me about the UFO. I'm like, holy shit. Like, it was just.
God, I don't remember that.
You don't remember the accident?
No, I don't.
Yeah, I had forgotten it until I took a look at some of these tapes.
And I think the lady from the Iron Gate Grill, I forget her name, she came outside and she was kind of like, oh, that's so-and-so. This happens all the time.
Yeah, it was kind of like just another day. Another thing I remember about Dave, the variety of which the reports that Dave told us about that he took in, it would be, a ball of light streaking through the sky in the woods. It would be one day. But then the next day would be like a mechanical craft stopped in front of my car in broad daylight 20 feet away from me, to where like, that's a huge difference in terms of seeing a flash of a light. And then the next day you have someone claiming that they saw a craft descend in front of their car, land on a highway, and then move away. And it wasn't just like one person. You go, oh, well, that's just one kook. Hundreds and hundreds of people would report the variety of these UFO sightings that ranged from lights, from, anomalous type of things, to like craft with working gears and engines and noises. Sometimes they were silent. A lot of them were over the Ohio River. Sometimes they were like, 10 feet lasting for 30 minutes. Sometimes they were 100 feet away lasting for seconds.
Well, it's also the fact that, you're not hearing from a quack who's like, no, I saw it and it was, it had aliens with 5 legs coming out and all that kind of stuff, which is usually what you kind of what kind of credence you would give to somebody who said they saw UFOs. This is now filtered through a legitimate journalist,
right?
Who has,
and this was back when journalism actually was journalism. You would think and hope, where your job is not to criticize; it's to report facts,
right? And so it's now being filtered through that level of validity, and I'm sure he had to go to every one of those stories and be like, okay, here's another guy calling up. Here's another person who wants to be interviewed. Here's another person who's looking for attention. But you didn't really get the sense that he had to report all this stuff begrudgingly because it's just a bunch of quacks and that's what they want to fill the newspaper with. It was him kind of having concern.
Yeah.
That it's just like, wow, all these people at the same time talking about very specific things who don't seem like quacks. They don't seem like people who are looking for attention. People who are legitimately concerned about what they saw.
That's a great point. Yeah, he didn't work for the National Enquirer.
Right.
He worked for a credible local newspaper, but which was a large publication. And right, from what I remember him telling us, it was more from the standpoint of like, we're trying to figure out what is going on in our town. Like, there's a concern there. There's an issue, just like you would report a car wreck. Like this was, questionable threat, and it was just confusion. And just the diversity of sightings of, orbs over power plants, daytime sightings. I mean, anytime there's a daytime sighting, I always think that's way more interesting than like a UFO sighting at night. That can be often misinterpreted. You see, sometimes we've all probably had this. You see a light for a minute and you go like, that looks a little strange. And then finally you see like the transponder light and you go, oh, that's an airplane. And it's recognizable through a certain method of just common sense, rule out something and figure it out. But when you're seeing something in a daylight that you can't describe, I mean, that just automatically starts to lend a little more credence to the idea that like you are really seeing something that you cannot identify.
Yeah. Plus, it's not some drunk coming from a bar or something like that.
On a motorcycle.
Yeah. It's 10:30 in the morning and it's a school teacher and she's, that kind of thing.
Right. I do remember. That's the other thing he told us. He said these were not questionable people. These were, pastors and school teachers and town councilmen and like people that, had jobs on the line that like if they start going around telling ridiculous stories that they saw UFOs, that's probably not doing them any good in the public persona.
Did he connect us to the other to Mary Hyer's editor?
I found that guy on my
did they know each other?
No, those are two separate things. They're both from newspaper publications, but
they were not from the same newspaper.
No, I tracked down her publisher, or I tracked down her editor by just like name. And honestly, I started calling people out of the phone book with that name, and I eventually found him. We're talking about Roy Cross, who was Mary Hyer's editor and boss at the Athens Messenger, and that's something separate. I remember this was a great interview, just really full of interesting information, especially if you're like a big UFO enthusiast like I am. I mean, that's probably my favorite little bullet in any type of paranormal story. I think UFOs are just, it always grabs my attention. So I loved interviewing Dave, and I remember it being just a pretty insightful interview. Hopefully you feel the same, and hopefully you enjoy our sit down with Dave Peyton, former journalist of the Herald Dispatch.
For starters, can you just, so I have it on the record later, tell me your name and spell it for me?
David Peyton, DAVID PEYTON.
You prefer David or
Dave? I prefer Dave, right?
Okay. And for your title, what in terms of like a title, what should I give you? A reporter?
I'm a columnist. I'm a columnist for the Charleston Daily Mail.
Charleston Daily Mail.
Yeah,
okay.
In Charleston, West Virginia.
Okay, great. So my first question is, you covered many of the UFO sightings and occurrences here in West Virginia during 1966 and 67. Can you tell me about the numerous accounts that were going on in this area?
Well, when it comes to the number of sightings in 66 and 67, I don't have any idea because there were so many of them. At the time of these sightings, I worked for the Herald Dispatch in Huntington. And I had been there probably, I was kind of a newbie, but I had probably been there full time no more than a couple of years. And just out of the blue, these sightings started happening. And first there was a trickle of them, one or two a night, and suddenly they began swelling to 5 a night, 10 a night, 20 a night. And it was just natural for people in our circulation area, which included this area of Mason County, all the way over actually into Putnam County, along the Kanawha River. It was just natural for people to call up. Usually there were two questions. There were two comments. The first thing it would say is, anybody else seen anything? Have you heard anybody reporting any strange sightings in the sky? And then we would say, well, why? And then they would tell me, and they'd almost invariably begin, look, I'm a God-fearing Christian person. I don't tell lies, but I just saw the strangest thing I have ever seen in my life over my barn or over my house or behind the trees. And I want to know what it is. Do you have any idea what it is? Of course, we'd say no. And sometimes these people would be absolutely hysterical. We started, after we were getting 5 or 10 a night, we would start reporting on them the next morning. And it got so that we actually had to set up, for a period of time, we had to set up what we called the UFO desk, where when they called into the PBX operator and they would say, I just saw something in the sky and I want to report it, she would connect that person with our UFO reporter for the evening. I was that reporter probably 2 or 3 times, but it kind of circulated. And it just became otherworldly, the number of reports we got, because we went from 0 reports to 50 a night in less than 2 weeks. And then later on, they went from 50 a night almost to 0.
I'm going to ask you a similar question, and I forgot to tell you, sometimes I might ask you the same question twice. Just means I'm trying to get multiple answers from you. Can you tell me about, in 1966, 1967, all of a sudden these kind of weird lights start becoming an everyday occurrence in the skies. People started seeing UFOs. If you can use that kind of as your open, include the word UFOs with sightings, so people know what we're talking about seeing. Can you tell me about some of the things people are seeing in the skies here? And if you can put me in, if you can give me the date, the year, and location, mention Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 1966 and 67, people started seeing UFOs, something like that.
Well, when it came to sightings of UFOs in the Point Pleasant area in 66 and 67, I don't have the specific dates that it occurred, but I do know that it was that they became rather frequent from almost 0 to say 50 or 60 a night in a matter of a couple of weeks. Then they stayed at that frequency probably for 2 or 3 more weeks, and then finally they went down. I'd say it was probably late 60 or 66 or late 67. Most of them, people reported were just lights. Sometimes they said they saw balls of fire. Some people claimed that they heard motors or mechanisms in connection with them. Sometimes they said they were silent. Sometimes these lights danced in the sky. Sometimes sometimes people would report that they landed in their cornfield, and when they went out to look at them, they took off with great speed. But each and every one of these people were very anxious to tell me, look, I don't believe in UFOs. I don't believe in flying saucers. I think it's nonsense. And I don't lie. I'm a upstanding member of the community. Many of them would give us their names and addresses and want us to come out and talk to them. And a few times we did, but most of the time we were a very small newspaper with a limited staff. So we mostly relied on what they were telling us over the phone, and then we would report it in the newspaper.
You had said frequently, there were 2 things that a call would always have.
I know, that's me. Do you like that better?
Ooh, makes me look spooky.
Than that?
Yeah.
You like that better?
Yeah. I think we can still use those, the first 2, because, right? Sure. Because when we cut back, it's a small difference. You said there were kind of the standard 2 things that followed when someone would call. Has anyone seen anything else? And then the kind of almost already jump to the conclusion of, justifying their credibility. Can you tell me about that?
When these people called, they were usually rather frenetic because they had just witnessed something. But the first thing they wanted to know was, has anybody else in my area, usually these people were along the Kanawha River from Point Pleasant to Charleston, to that area. What they would say is, has anybody else in my area reported seeing anything tonight? And when we would say, we would answer their question with a question, is why do you say that? And then they would begin, almost invariably, these people would say, look, I'm a good Christian, upstanding person in the community. Here's my name and here's where I live. And I want you to know that I don't lie, and I'm not trying to get my name in the paper, but I just saw something that scared me to death. And it not only scared me, but my dogs are barking. My kids are under the bed crying. These people some of them almost appeared as if they were in shock. Some of these people, especially people who lived alone, or there were some instances where women would be calling and their husbands worked the night shift and they were alone with their children. They would be almost panicked at what they saw. These people saw something. They were not lying to us. They were not the type of people who would lie. They saw something very definitely. And because of the frequency of these sightings, I have to believe that something was going on out there.
And you said you had worked the UFO desk a few nights. So are there any specific calls or incidents that stick out in the mind?
One of them I remember, and I don't remember the name, but this woman claimed that that she had seen what she claimed to be a ball of fire come down slowly out of the sky into a tree line behind her house, say 100 yards or so. And her husband apparently went out, took his gun, like mountain folks like to do. You never go outside at night to investigate because you don't take your gun. But I remember she said that he went out to investigate to see what he could see, and he came at that time. She was watching him, and he got there maybe 50 or halfway to the tree line, and the thing lifted off the ground, and she could see him because he was standing between the ball of fire and where she was from the kitchen window, and she said that he just froze, and whatever it was, whatever the ball of light was, she said took off, went up into the sky, and then took off at a tremendous rate of speed. And her husband came back, and she said he just had this hollow look in his eye, like. And I said, "Well, is he all right now?" She said, "Well, he's sitting in the chair in there, and I think he's okay, but he hasn't said anything since the happening." And she said, "I'm a little concerned about him." And then she said, "Wait a minute, I've got to go now because he wants to say something to me." She hung up, and I don't know what happened since then. But obviously he was in shock. Like I think a lot of the people who called me were actually in shock. They were a lot of them were just frantic, and some of them were screaming and crying, almost as if they had seen. I've talked to a lot of people who've witnessed bad accidents, fires, and things like that, and a lot of them are in shock. Some of them are just kind of hollow-eyed, but a lot of them are just so frantic they can barely speak. And I'd say a significant number of those people were that way at what they saw.
So we're on 16.9, right? 65. Yeah. Okay. The other thing that doesn't look that stretch for some reason. Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. You're doing great, Dave. Those are great answers.
Thanks.
Perfect. So, Point Pleasant's kind of known for Mothman in terms of the weird things going on here. A lot of people don't realize that there are with Mothman, there was all these UFOs. So while Mothman was going on here at Point Pleasant, it wasn't the only thing kind of buzzing around the skies here. Tell me what else was going on.
You mean besides Mothman?
Yeah, well, the UFOs. That's
besides the UFOs?
Yeah, it's just kind of like, a lot of people, when you tell them, oh, well, Mothman's not just about Mothman. There are these UFOs going on all the time at the same time. So for someone who's kind of knows about the story of Point Pleasant, but only the Mothman side, talk to me as if I'm one of those people. Tell me, aside from Mothman's not the only kind of weird thing people are seeing in the sky 66, 67, there are these UFOs, and just tell me a little bit about that.
To my way of thinking, Mothman was sort of like a crescendo to a long period of time when some very unusual sights, where there were some very, very unusual sights in and around Point Pleasant and up the Kanawha River, almost all the way to Charleston. That's what, when Mothman finally happened, we all the newspaper threw up our hands and said, well, that figures. I mean, it was almost like it was old news. Another sighting of another unidentified flying something or other. We thought it was odd that we'd actually connected a being with them, because most of the sightings that people had reported were of craft. They had never reported seeing a being of any kind. And so when we finally started getting reports of actually a being flying around up here, scaring people to death, we thought, well, it figures whatever was flying around up there, whatever machines were flying around, they finally got out and trying to take control of Point Pleasant.
That's great. I'm gonna ask you something similar. Can you maybe try to throw in something where it's kind of like, most people don't realize that, because I think, like, I didn't know that either, where it's like when I first read the story Mothman, when I later found out that there were UFOs involved, it was kind of like, so for some reason that detail seems to get left out a lot sometimes. And I think maybe just because the flying monster thing is kind of like the like the sexier story, or, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, it's more, it outdoes the UFOs. So can you tell me, like, a lot of people don't realize, but, Mothman's not the only thing that's seen in the skies during 66, 67. There's all these other.
Well, there was a lot of sightings of a lot of different unusual objects in the sky in and around Point Pleasant and in other parts of West Virginia during that period of time. I was focused on Point Pleasant and Mason County, but we had a few sightings, for instance, of such things near Huntington at the time. There were sightings on farther up in the state of West Virginia, central West Virginia, sightings of unidentified flying objects at the same time, and they got reported to some degree in the newspapers and on television. But when the Mothman appeared, it just kind of overshadowed everything else, because finally we had an unidentified flying object with legs and glowing eyes, and was really terrorizing people. The UFOs terrorized people just by being there. Mothman was actually terrorizing people because he had appeared to want to terrorize people, and I think that's really why he took center stage when that happened.
Great. I've done a lot of research just for years in terms of UFOs. It's always been something I've been interested in, so I kind of know a lot about that. But many of the UFO cases here that happen, they kind of really like break the mold of a typical sighting. A lot of times someone sees like a little light in the sky and it doesn't make sense and it goes in 3 seconds and then they say, oh, that's a UFO. But that's not kind of the typical sightings that were going on here. People were not just seeing lights in the sky, but actually coming into direct and close contact with like solid working craft, even in broad daylight. Can you tell me about some of those incidents and how they kind of break the mold?
The UFOs in and around Point Pleasant were a different breed of UFO, because most UFO sightings, you see them a mile away or 10 miles away, or you're driving home late at night and you see them streak across the sky at 1,000 miles an hour or whatever. But here in Point Pleasant, there were people and still are people who say, this machine came down, it lit in our backyard, or it lit just beyond that grove of trees there, or it lit down by the barn. And even some people claim that that when they went out to investigate the next morning, they found patches of burnt grass and burnt weeds. So that's where the difference was. And in addition to that, these UFOs just didn't come and go quickly. A lot of them would hover for 5, 10, 15 minutes, a half hour, or whatever. And so it almost appeared as if I think a lot of people at the time who lived in this area really believed that this was a true invasion, that these unidentified flying objects were here in this particular region for a purpose. About that same time, a friend of mine who lived in this area and who drove between Huntington and Point Pleasant said that he was driving from Huntington late one night, and just below Point Pleasant, between Point Pleasant and Huntington, there are some major power lines that come from a power plant just upriver from Point Pleasant here. Or no, I think so. I'm not sure. But anyway, there's some major power lines across the river between Huntington and Point Pleasant. He swears that it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd been at a party in Huntington, and he drove around a bend West Virginia, Route 2 in West Virginia 2, and saw a UFO with a probe coming out of the bottom of it, touching a power line. I don't know if you've heard any UFO stories or not, but there are reports worldwide that some UFOs seem to recharge themselves by hovering over power lines to get electricity into their system. He swears that this one had a probe of about 50 feet long that came down from the UFO and was touching that power line as if it was draining the power line of electricity or charging its batteries or whatever. So I think in this area we had a different kind of encounter. Maybe it's the encounter of the Point Pleasant kind that we're talking about here.
People even, I had heard even stories of people seeing UFOs like in broad daylight. Some stories I've even heard, it's like, someone's driving down the road, desolate road, broad daylight, and there's like physically something in the road. Okay, so I was asking you about some of these daylight sightings. If you want, you could either tell me about some of those and then we'll talk about your own experience, or if you want to, tell me about some of these daylight encounters that you can remember going on at Point Pleasant and then going to your own.
The Herald Dispatch newspaper in Huntington, for which I worked at the time, was a morning paper. So our cycle, we didn't actually really start gathering news until in the afternoons, late afternoons, and we stayed there until 1 o'clock in the morning. So most of the reports that we got were of nighttime sightings. Although when we got in, we shared a newsroom with an afternoon newspaper, the Advertiser, and they had a UFO desk too, because they were getting calls all morning and afternoon long about sightings of UFOs in this particular area, and they were bleeding over into Cabell County. This Point Pleasant is in Mason County, and Cabell County is the county where Huntington is. So they were getting calls from people who saw objects in the daytime. And it was very strange. Some of the objects were very small. Some of them supposedly were very big. All of them tended to be metallic. But the fact that they were happening in the daytime, they seemed to be less threatening to people because you could see the object. You did, at nighttime, all you were seeing was the glow and all these, you could see the glow from it, or the fire, as a lot of people called it. But in the daytime, they seemed to be less threatening. At no time, except when the Mothman appeared, did anybody ever report that they saw any kind of beings in or around these spacecraft or these UFOs. And
you said yourself, you've only seen one UFO in your time, but even yourself, it was during the day.
Right. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I suspect, the only time I ever saw what I considered a UFO was in the daytime. And I lived just south of Huntington on a country road. And I looked up, didn't hear anything, but what I saw was a metallic craft of some kind moving at very, very tremendous speeds. I don't know how far up in the sky it was, until all of a sudden it kind of stopped and hovered there for a while and then moved on. That was a daytime sighting. And this, I could see it was metallic because the sun was, it was reflecting the sun's light. And I've never seen a nighttime UFO. Everything that I've seen could be explained. I've seen meteors and those kind of shooting stars and things like that, but I knew pretty much what they were. I've seen airplane lights and I know what they look like, but this one was totally unexplainable to me, and it was in the daytime.
It's weird. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this case. I kind of was just touching on it a minute ago. There's one case, a specific case that I'm talking about, where there's a man traveling down Route 64, and he stops his car because it literally, the whole road is being blocked by a huge metallic object. And he walks right up to it, observes propellers, wheels, and engine. He gets close enough to touch it, and then watches it rise right up to the sky and disappear. Are you familiar with that story at all?
I'm not familiar with that one. Was that in the daytime, by the way, or was it really? Oh, damn. I've never heard of that one. You interviewed him?
No, I wish. Let me move on to the next one. Then. The people who were reporting these bizarre things, they were all walks of life people. Policemen, public officials, church people. These were all well-respected people in the community.
Yes.
Kind of diverse kind of people. Can you tell me that? Talk to me about that.
The people who reported these sightings.
Can you say UFO sightings?
Okay. The people who reported these UFO sightings were ordinary people. Some of them, not many of them, but some of them we knew because they were contacts. They were public officials. They were police. They were, a lot of them would tell us we're good church-going people. Well, yeah, we knew that they were good church-going people. They were honest people. And that's what made it so unusual. Even our editors newspaper editors tend to be a bit cynical, as you are well aware. And I was a young reporter at the time. I hadn't reached my pinnacle of being cynical, but even the editors, the ones who've been there 20, 30 years, say something going on out here. Cause I know old Joe so-and-so, he lives up there. He's a good man. I've gotten good information from him before. Something's going on because he wouldn't come out and tell a lie like this. What he saw something. We don't, they would say, well, we don't know what they saw, but obviously he saw something. And that's what made us pay attention at the time. And that's what made us report it in the newspaper, almost on a daily basis. It got so that one night, a friend of mine who had gone to Marshall University with me in journalism, and I decided we got permission from one of the editors to, take his camera. He was a photographer at the time, and to come up here. And we spent the whole night driving on Route 35 between Charleston and Point Pleasant, back and forth, Charleston to Point Pleasant, looking for these things. Unfortunately, we never found one that night, but and I think we were kind of on the downside of the phenomena. And so we didn't see any that night, but we were sure. What we decided to do was, we would stop every once in a while and call in a landline phone. There were no cell phones at the time, of course, no two-way radios. So we would call and say, have you gotten any reports yet? And we just weren't able to take pictures because we were convinced that we were going to get pictures that night. Unfortunately, we didn't.
1 o'clock at his house. Yeah, 1 o'clock at his house. So we were just talking about the credibility of the people that kind of reported these things. And, I think a lot of people forget when they first hear that, someone's reported a UFO. These people kind of coming forward reporting UFOs, if they have nothing to gain. If anything, they've got everything to lose because their credibility's on the line, and they're telling ridiculous things. So the idea that I think it almost works in their favor that the numbers of people that reported things, and if you consider the fact that they have everything to lose in coming forward because their credibility's on them.
Many of the folks who reported this to us would report these sightings only if we wouldn't use their name. They would tell us their names and give us their addresses, but they say, I don't want anything in the newspaper about this. They weren't going for the glory. They weren't looking to have anybody come interview them or anything else. I still remember a lot of people who would say, I'd say, could I have your name? You can only have my name and my phone number if you promise not to use it in the newspaper, because I don't want any glory for this. I don't want any recognition for it. I think the secondary reason they didn't want it was they didn't want people thinking they were crazy. But they wanted somebody to know. They wanted us to know. It was almost as if they thought, well, if I tell the newspaper, other people may be calling the newspaper. Maybe they're gathering information about this. And so it was obvious, mountain folks, the people who live in this valley and in West Virginia don't like to attract attention to themselves. They're kind of independent and they're kind of loners. They love their families and they don't want to get involved in anything. And they certainly don't want people to think that they're crazy. That's the way they were then. That's the way they are now. So for a lot of these people to come and to tell us must have been difficult for them. And I still suspect that there were for everyone who called, there were probably 10 or 15 people who saw something and never reported it, and still won't report it today.
Well, it seemed like the UFO sightings that were happening here in Point Pleasant, it seemed like for some reason, they were always attracted to the Ohio River and the TNT plants. Can you talk about the frequency of the sightings in those two locations?
I know there were a lot of sightings over the TNT area in Point Pleasant. I know that there were sightings because my friend saw one, for instance, like I said, over the Ohio River, seeming to drain a power line. The other places, the sightings that we heard a lot about at the newspaper were actually on the Kanawha River between Point Pleasant and Charleston, or Point Pleasant and St. Albans, that area. So they seem to be along the river. There seemed to be concentrated along the river. Now, as I understand that there were sightings in other parts of West Virginia at that time where they weren't along the rivers, but here it seemed as if I don't know whether the river was a mark for them, or whether they had something whether they were attracted by the river or whatever, or the TNT plant. But all of the UFO sightings didn't take place on the Ohio River. All of them didn't take place on the Kanawha River, and all of them didn't take place at the TNT plant. But there was a concentration of UFO sightings in the general area around here.
Many of these craft witnessed by the people, they later said that many times the craft had no sound, they were silent, and they made maneuvers not like any man-made aircraft that they'd ever seen. Can you tell me about some of these characteristics and traits that these UFOs had? They weren't just sometimes blurs of light; they were kind of extraordinary in those regards.
Well, our newspaper got all kinds of sightings, all kinds of different stories from people during that particular time. Some of the craft made noise. Some of them made a humming sound. Some made a whooshing sound. Most of them were silent. Many of these people described the craft as almost a ball of fire. Others said that they had a strange glow to them. In most instances, though, as I recall now, most of those people said that they made no noise at all. Occasionally, I think people said they made a booming sound, almost as if they were a jet breaking the sound barrier or something to that effect. But I don't think you can pinpoint any particular, that was the strange thing about it. If they were craft from another galaxy, there must have been various models. I mean, there wasn't a one particular kind of unidentified flying object at the time. I think they varied in shape, size, and the sound that they made.
And would you say that many people that reported sightings also reported that the movements that the UFOs had movements and maneuvers that showed that there was intelligence behind them, that they were intelligent but broke the kind of physics that a normal aircraft would make?
I think that the people who saw those UFOs in and around Point Pleasant during that particular time honestly believed that they were not natural phenomena, that they were phenomena that were manned or guided by intelligent beings, and that's the reason they called. If they thought that they were some kind of a natural phenomena or something that was part of nature, they wouldn't have called us. But the way they maneuvered, the way they seemed to disappear when Grandpa got his gun out and walked toward them or whatever, or the way they would hover over a tree line, I think most of these people believed that there was something intelligent maneuvering them.
And I'd have to think that West Virginia, just given the territory, a lot of people are hunters, a lot of people are fishermen, a lot of people kind of are well connected to nature and the environment. So, they're well aware of things like shooting stars, things like different periods of where the moon looks different. Can you talk a little bit about just, their familiarity with the environment? It almost gives them a unique perspective because they know when something is weird in the sky.
Any native of West Virginia who's been around for a while knows the natural phenomena that they see in the night sky or the daytime sky. As a matter of fact, they know what the moon looks like. They know what a shooting star looks like. They know what even a lot of people know what ball lightning looks like, which is a disputed form of lightning that forms a ball and goes rampaging across the sky. And I've seen that too. I know what ball lightning looks like. These people who called up, almost all of them would say, I've seen a lot of strange things in the sky, but I've never seen anything like this. And so that's why, once again, we tended to trust their observations, because a lot of these people who called were farmers. A lot of people who called were hunters. And they know what's natural and what's not. And they were trying to tell us this is not natural.
Great. I'm going to change the subject. Actually, no, one more question in that area. Many people acquainted and believe that both the Mothman and the UFOs sighted here in Point Pleasant had something to do with one another. Can you talk a little bit about this? The fact that people kind of did acquaint them to one another, and why the correlation between UFOs?
Well, the UFOs and Mothman were a correlation because they happened so close together. I mean, it was, as I said, it was almost as if the appearance of Mothman was sort of like a crescendo, like the final act. I can't remember now whether there were sightings, UFO sightings, after the appearance of Mothman. I don't think there were that many sightings, as I recall. It's a long time ago, but as I recall, when Mothman appeared and then finally disappeared, I think that there were probably very few sightings of unidentified flying objects after that, as I recall. And I can't remember the period of time between when the most sightings of UFO took place and Mothman, but I think they were close together, and there was probably enough of them close enough together for people even up here to believe that they were connected somehow. And a lot of people, I think, when the Mothman appeared and started fluttering about here and there, I'm sure there's a lot of people in Point Pleasant said, "Are we cursed? Or am I going crazy?" And then a lot of people say, "Oh my God, what's next?" And of course, we know what was next: the Silver Bridge.
Right. I'm going to change the subject a little bit. You're a reporter. You've been a reporter for a long time. Are you familiar with the work that was conducted by Mary Heyer, who is a reporter for the Athens, Ohio Messenger? If you are, can you talk a little bit about her legacy and her work involvement here with Mothman?
No, sorry.
Okay, no problem. No problem.
I've heard the name, but I didn't read her stuff. I don't know.
You're not familiar with her work?
She's still alive?
No.
Okay.
But you're not familiar with her work?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
All right, I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about the Men in Black. People in Point Pleasant, not only were not only witnessing strange things in the sky, but also kind of right in front of their faces. Many witnesses claimed to have had face-to-face intrusions with people that they call Men in Black. Can you tell me about this? I mean, these are kind of like government people, or just, I guess in a small town, everyone kind of knows everyone. So when there's kind of an outsider here, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. And I think maybe that's what was going on a bit. Can you know about that?
No, I've only heard about the Men in Black up here recently, because when this was happening, nobody up here mentioned to us about the Men in Black. That's a phenomena that we didn't hear about, that I never heard about, as a matter of fact, until the first Mothman Festival last year. I'm sure, if they were here, and from what I understand, if they were here, they were not only very secret about it, but everybody up here kept it a secret. And we never heard. I mean, nobody ever called us and said, "You got to come up here. There's some strange men in black suits wandering around town." We never heard about it.
So you weren't in the calls that you got regarding UFOs and things. Did you ever receive any calls about these witnesses kind of maybe being approached by any people that get certain?
We would no. The calls we would get were from people who had just seen an unidentified flying object. And as I understand it, these men in black usually appeared a day or two later, sometimes a week later or whatever. So we were catching the people just as they had seen the phenomena, probably before the men in black got to them, if there were men in black.
This podcast is a companion piece to the original feature-length documentary film from 2011 of the same title. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to see the film that started it all by visiting www.eyesofthemothman.com.
Are you familiar at all with the stuff that happened up in Parkersburg with Woodrow Derenberger and the Ingrid Cold whole thing? Are you familiar with that at all? The guy who was he was not only having like UFO experiences, but they were kind of like going beyond even the normal sightings. He was claiming to have kind of communication with other beings. And
No.
like that.
No.
Okay.
Parkersburg was out of our area, and we probably wouldn't have heard about it.
There was also a sighting that happened quite a bit that was interesting because a bunch of people saw it and they kind of all described it the same unique way. There was like a sighting where people were describing seeing what they thought was like a kerosene lamp in the sky. Do you remember that one at all?
No, I don't remember that.
Silver Bridge.
Okay.
Did you cover the fall of the Silver Bridge? If you did, can you tell me about the event in relation to everything else that you were covering previously, like UFOs? Was the bridge coincidence or kind of like another oddity in this whole?
I arrived at the place where the Silver Bridge was about 3 hours after the Silver Bridge collapsed. It was dark, and instead of coming up the West Virginia side, I came up Ohio Route 7 and was stationed across the river from where the bridge was. I spent the night there. Then I came home on Saturday and Sunday, but then for the next week, I covered the Silver Bridge for both or the collapse of Silver Bridge for both newspapers, talking to people, talking to officials and whatever. My first reaction was, this is a terrible thing to happen. It was one of the most incredible tragedies that I covered. I covered 3 major tragedies as a reporter. I covered the collapse of Silver Bridge, the floods in Buffalo Creek and Logan County, and the Marshall airplane crash that killed the football team and coaches and fans. It was interesting to me because it didn't cross my mind that this was a continuum until the next week, and the connection that the community made between the Silver Bridge and all the other things that had gone on before. It took it a while to catch on, because you got to remember this town was in total and complete shock for 3 or 4 days. And then when they started talking to each other, it's then that the legend began to grow. Well, this is just another of the odd and unusual things that have happened to us here in Point Pleasant. And this is a culmination of events that have gone on before. There were even, I remember during that week, there were people that would come up to me and say, do you think, remember those UFOs that we saw a year or 2 or 3 ago? You think maybe they did something to the bridge when they were flying over to cause it to crash or whatever, fall into the river? And then by the time that week was up, they were making the connection between the collapse of the Silver Bridge and the curse of Cornstalk. But I think it took a while for them to start making those connections.
And do you think part of that was just part of the reasoning behind that? I mean, obviously just because, there have been so many frequent occurrences with that here. But do you think part of that was also stemming from, when that tragedy happened, people kind of wanted answers and they wanted someone to blame. Do you think that kind of lent a hand into that?
Anytime there is an accident or tragedy that takes so many lives, people want to blame someone. And it just seems so otherworldly that a bridge would collapse just out of the blue one evening before Christmas time. And so West Virginians being, are mountain folks, and mountain folks, the culture is Scotch Irish, and they believe in the unseen. And if you can't blame the real world, then maybe you can blame something in the unseen world. And I think that's where the idea came that perhaps was part of the curse of Cornstalk, and the legend grew from there.
Can you tell me, after the investigation of the Silver Bridge was conducted, what was found? What caused the collapse?
There were corroded eye bars. You got to understand that there was only 2 or 3 bridges built like the Silver Bridge, and they used a construction known as eye bar construction. It's a boat.
Boat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you start that one again? Tell me, after the investigation of the Silver Bridge is conducted, what's found? What caused the collapse? You said there was only 2.
Right. The Silver Bridge there was only a few bridges built the way the Silver Bridge was, and it was called an I-beam or an I-bar construction. And it gets a little technical, and I don't completely understand it, but these bars that were kind of a pin going into a slot had corroded, and obviously our State Department of Highways had not inspected the bridge. Later on, it was found out they hadn't inspected the bridge the way they should have, and these pins corroded. And so one cold night in December, the pins just snapped, and the bridge fell. And after that, they went to the other bridges on the Ohio River that were built this way, and basically discovered that they were on their way to being in the same fix. So they eventually tore all the bridges that were built that way down and rebuilt them.
Can you tell me, the Silver Bridge, it's kind of funny. It was almost like a cap for all of these weird things that were happening, because after the Silver Bridge fell, all the UFOs, the Mothman, it kind of seemed to just end right there. So it's kind of weird, because it seemed to be kind of an ending for all of this, but it also, in the same respect, created more questions, because a lot of people thought maybe it was related to the weirdness. So the Silver Bridge fell, and it was kind of an end to these things because they stopped immediately after. But it also, in the same respect, started to evoke more questions.
Well, all of these things, beginning with the UFO sightings and continuing with the Mothman and then ending with the Silver Bridge collapse, gave folks a lot to talk about. And Point Pleasant is a small town. Everybody knows everybody else, and they like to talk. And so I think that this is the way legends grow. This is the way rumors start. And I think that everybody, put all of these things together. One thing led to another. The UFOs led to Mothman, and Mothman led to the collapse of the Silver Bridge, and maybe it all goes back to the curse of Cornstalk. I think, it gave people a lot to talk about. And even today, there are those who will say that there's something strange about Point Pleasant, because while a lot of towns in the area and a lot of counties in the area have not thrived, but have done well economically, Point Pleasant hasn't. Could that be something strange about Point Pleasant? Could it still be suffering from the bad luck? And others would say, well, is Cornstalk still cursing Point Pleasant, and that's why Point Pleasant hasn't grown the way it has? There'll always be those kind of things, especially in West Virginia, where as I said, people look for reasons for things, and sometimes they look outside the realm of the natural world to the spiritual world to determine if there's something out there causing things to happen.
Okay. If you can recall, were there UFO reports, to the best of your recollection, the night of November 15th, 1967, the night the Silver Bridge fell?
I don't think so. that night I was off duty. I wasn't working that night. I was at a friend's house, and we were sitting watching television. As a matter of fact, I didn't get the news of the collapse of the Silver Bridge from our newspaper. I got it from watching television, and so I wasn't at the newspaper office. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I suspect that the occurrences of UFOs were down to almost zero at that particular time. I think we had gone through most of the UFO sightings.
Even though you just kind of answered, I'm going to ask you a kind of different question, but you'll probably give me the same answer. After the fall of the Silver Bridge, did the UFO activity stop? Or, you can kind of answer it like you just did, where it's kind of like, by the time the Silver Bridge fell, the UFO activity was kind of out of decline and it kind of ended there.
By the time the Silver Bridge collapsed into the river, most of the UFO sightings had gone by weeks, maybe months. I can't remember, but I know that UFOs in Point Pleasant and Mason County didn't seem to be an issue at the time of the collapse of Silver Bridge.
These are kind of side questions. In your work and investigations, have you come across many UFO or any paranormal related sightings with UFOs taking place with any frequency during thunderstorms?
No, I haven't, and I don't remember that at all.
This is one thing I was going to touch on, and I think you know a little bit about. And I had some of the research I've done, it seems that there's been a great deal of UFO sightings occurring over power plants, specifically here in the town, and it kind of all. I think if you look at it, it kind of makes sense to a degree because it kind of goes back to what you were talking about. There's been a lot of UFO sightings in connection with energy or electricity. Can you talk to me about that with power plants and then other forms?
Point Pleasant and this area is kind of like a hub of power production, electric production. Up the Kanawha River, there is the John Amos Power Plant, and up the Kanawha River. Then up the Ohio River here is Kiger Creek Power Plant, and there's several power plants in this area. And I've often wondered whether these. I've read stories of how there seems to be a significant number of sightings, not only over power plants but over very high-powered electric lines. And I think that there may be something to that. Are they actually getting energy from the power plants? Are they getting energy from the power lines? Whatever. This is kind of like Point Pleasant is kind of a nexus between power plants and a place where I'm sure there is a lot of electrical energy within 20 miles of here being produced.
It makes sense with the water too, because water is kind of a conductor of energy. Think about it as well. Talk a little about that.
The Ohio River here, of course, a lot of the sightings in this area seem to be located over the Ohio River or the Kanawha River. And I've just heard recently that there are a significant number of sightings of unidentified objects underwater. They're called unidentified underwater objects or whatever. I've never heard, no one who called us those during that time said, I just saw a UFO plunge into the river and disappear. But it makes you wonder whether or not the water has something to do with their appearance and their disappearance.
Jesus Christ!
What'd he do?
He just fell off his bike and he's laying in the road.
You're kidding.
Like a moped.
Is he okay? We were going to see. I think he did. He looks like he's stunned. Looks like he's about to pass out.
Yeah, he hit the ground.
Did he?
Yeah, I saw them. I got the break for a minute.
Okay, break. Is he bleeding? Is he bleeding?
I think he was making this turn here, and he hit right in the
Yeah, hi. Some guy in Point Pleasant.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. He's hurt pretty bad. A bicycle?
Moped. Yeah.
Don't move.
Don't move, guys. 601 Main Street. Yeah.
They're only calling 911.
We just live right there. We're just gonna go home. We're just gonna go home. Oh, yeah, I'll get in there. Come on, let me have this time. Let me have it. I think he's all right, actually. I think he's all right. Yeah.
It looks pretty nice.
Grab your hat and follow it.
I think he's been drinking.
That's why he didn't want to see the officers of the law.
Yeah, I watched the whole thing because someone
Can't look at him. Can't walk a straight line. Look at that. Good Lord looks after drunks. They never get hurt. Drunks never get hurt.
Subway, you know? Covered blood completely.
And look at him.
Where did you get the blood from? I don't know. It was really bloody. I don't know. I'm not sure. Downstairs. No. That was a different time. I'm talking this covered in blood. I was just on the subway. It's like, hey man, your face is covered in blood. And I'm like, literally, like blood everywhere. I still have a scar from up here on the edge. I don't know why.
He'll be talking for an hour. He'll stop.
What happened? Dude, he's not driving a truck, is he? That wall.
Good Lord.
Yeah. Oh,
That's a one-way street.
no. Well, the friend walked his moped away and then walked around that way. What he did. He didn't get the guy. A wide turn on both of you. Hold this one.
He was going that way. He was walking back that way. We think he was highly intoxicated.
Yeah.
Is that blood? That's not blood, is it?
Yeah, it's blood.
That's gasoline. Gasoline, yeah. Or whiskey, yeah.
the documentary.
Man, alive.
Now you can see what you could look like.
He was knocked out, but he hit him at the end. I thought, he was all mangled underneath the thing, and it was just because he was like.
I looked and saw the whole thing, the whole thing. I saw the wide thing because I was like, oh, it's the guy in the hotel. And just done. The guys and stuff.
The Mothman was such big news, and we were a relatively small newspaper at the time, that the Associated Press was covering Mothman. And Point Pleasant was kind of the edge of our circulation area. And it was a long way up here. It was almost an hour up here and back. So we actually, because the Associated Press was on the story, we kind of turned the coverage of the Mothman over to the Associated Press. So we let the wire service cover it. The UFO sightings were not big enough for the Associated Press to cover all that much. So we were left to cover the UFO sightings. But the Mothman was such big news, and the Associated Press was willing to cover it. So we turned it over to them. So we didn't spend a lot of time covering the Mothman. Now, later on, you see the legend became bigger than the events, if you understand what I mean. So later on, the 1-year anniversary of the Mothman, the 2-year anniversary, all of that, I'm sure that we did some stories. I wasn't involved in covering those stories at the time, but our newspaper covered them. And actually, the Mothman is bigger news today than it probably was at the time that it happened. And I think it's going to only get bigger with the Mothman Festival up here. There was probably 10,000 people here in 2005. Who knows how many there'll be in 2006? And I've told the organizer of the Mothman Festival that if he keeps going the way I think it's going to go, he could have 100,000 people here in a few years.
Were you you were working in the area, covering the UFO activity in '66 and '67? So do you remember hearing about the stories of the Mothman and things like that? Just can you tell me a little bit about that? Just being someone who's in the immediate area at that time, what was going on there? What were people seeing and reporting?
It was interesting because we were getting reports from people, and they were kind of slow to come in. I think people were seeing this creature and were keeping it to themselves. I think that they were more likely to report UFOs than they were reporting seeing a creature appearing on roads out in the middle of nowhere. That was so far-fetched that I think a lot of people at the time said, well, I can't report that. What am I going to tell the people? And then the first trickle of reports came in, and then after that, there seemed to be almost a flood of reports, people saying. And I think that unfortunately, there were some people who were trying to get recognized. Oh, yeah, I saw the Mothman. Now, can I get my name in the paper? Or maybe if I talk about some fantastic story about the Mothman, maybe NBC will come down and cover it for me. So I think there was some trickle of reports came, and then there was this large flurry of reports, and they got so confused as to what. There was a lot of confusion as to who was telling the truth and who wasn't. And I know that there were charlatans at the time who were trying to cash in on claiming to have seen the Mothman. It was easy to say, yeah, I saw the Mothman. I was out at the TNT area with my girlfriend and whatever, and it flew, it came right in my car or whatever. So I think that, after it got to the point where you didn't know who to believe.
And for anyone who's never heard the story of the Mothman, what were people reporting? Tell me, what is it? What were people...
Everything. They were reporting, the one that I remember was the TNT area was a place to go park, for boys and girls to go park. And the one I remember particularly was the teenagers who were out there parking out there on the road, and this thing came out of nowhere and started. It was almost like whatever it was had glowing red eyes, and it was almost as if it were getting ready to attack these people. And then at the last minute, just before it looked like it was getting ready to attack, it would fly away. Or we heard stories of people driving down. There's a lot of lonely, desolate roads in this area, gravel roads and even some paved roads where nobody ever travels. And stories of people say, I came around this curve and this thing was sitting or standing in the middle of the road. And when it saw me, I tried to put on the brakes. And when I did, it would almost come to attention. And its eyes would have a strange glow to them, and it would sit there and stare at me for a few minutes and then suddenly just disappear. Some people say it went up into the sky. Some people say it would run off into the brush, whatever. There were other reports of people who said I was driving by and the thing was standing on the side of the road with its, and almost in every instance, it had wings, and the wings would be open rather than being closed. The interesting thing is the people who said that, the ones that I remember who said that it went up into the air or whatever, it didn't flap its wings. It would just kind of open its wings and ascend into the air, almost like you think of angels doing. Angels don't flap their wings, they just kind of open their wings and kind of rise, defying gravity. And then, you still hear stories of people who say, the Mothman stole my dog, or the Mothman killed my cow. Some of those stories may be true, and some people may be once again trying to get attention as a result of it.
And for some of the people that were claiming to have seen the Mothman, what were some of the things that were kind of regularly told with those stories? What were people? Can you describe for me what people said they were saying or were seeing? Some of the physical characteristics.
Very tall, 7, 8, 9 feet tall. Okay, people were reporting that this being was very tall, some between 7, 9, 10 feet tall. Had a huge wingspan of maybe 12 to 15 feet. Most of the time, it had its wings open. The most remarkable characteristic that all reported were the glowing eyes, mostly red eyes, and it seemed to be when this being was on some kind of alert for danger. It was almost as if the creature was as afraid of the humans as the humans were afraid of it. That it appeared sometimes as if it were going to attack or come closer, but it never did. It would sometimes, as if it would, when it recognized a person was near or a car was near, it would kind of crouch with its wings open and its eyes would glow, and then one way or another it would disappear. It would either run off into the bushes, or I've heard stories about how it would just kind of go up, defying gravity, not flapping its wings. Other people said that it would run away, and when it ran very fast. It would disappear almost as fast as a UFO would disappear across the sky.
And last question. There was a lot of controversy of what it was. People, I think it kind of maybe divided the town a bit, because some people were, claiming it was good. You had mentioned like an angel. Some people were claiming it's a demon. It's an angel. It's good. It's evil. It's a product of chemicals spilled in the plant. It's part of the government. It's part of the UFOs. Can you tell me some of these things? What were people, holding responsible for the Mothman? What were they saying?
I think most people who saw it, because of its physique, thought it was demonic. I heard reports of, there was some kind of experiments going on up at the TNT area, and they had created a creature that they had no control over, that the government had no control over. It was out of control. Other people said at the time that maybe it was a creature from outer space that the government was holding in the TNT area for experimentation. All kinds of stories like that. But nobody saw it as a good creature. I think most everybody saw it as something evil and something demonic and something to avoid.
Okay. I think that's good. Did you want to just mention, you had mentioned, I forget what the word was.
Token?
Yeah. You want to just mention that about the people of this region and what the significance of that is, and maybe Mothman was something that represented that?
Mountain people are culturally connected to the Scotch-Irish heritage. And, of course, these are the same people who see a lot of unnatural occurrences. The banshees in Ireland. One of the things that I thought of at the time when I saw the Mothman was the banshee. The banshee is the spiritual being that ran screaming across the sky. And
Hold on a second. Let's see if these people quiet then.
Party, party, party. This is Thursday night. They're getting an early start on the weekend.
All right, sorry about that. If you can start again and tell them.
The people of West Virginia are very closely culturally connected to the Scotch-Irish heritage. Our heritage in this area is primarily Scotch-Irish, although there are a lot of immigrants from other countries. The strongest ties we have are to the Scotch-Irish heritage. And you've got to understand that the Scotch-Irish people were known to see things that were maybe not that were a bit mystical and unnatural. For instance, it's the Scotch-Irish. The Irish people, of course, were familiar with banshees, which were spiritual beings that they would see over in Ireland. And when somebody saw a banshee, it was a token. We call it a token. Something bad was going to happen. I grew up with a lot of mountain folks who believed in tokens. When the old culture saw strange sights in their fields or in their yards, it was a token of impending doom. Something was going to happen. Most of the time, it was reported to me that they would say, well, I was looking out the window last night and I saw a white horse or a white dog going in slow motion across the field, galloping across the field. That's a token somebody's going to die. Or they would hear strange sounds in the night. And that was a token of something bad was going to happen, usually a death. So I think it was easy enough for the people who saw the Mothman to believe that it was a token of something bad was going to happen. So when the Silver Bridge collapsed, I think there were a significant number of people who said, now we understand. The Mothman was a token. It was a sign that something was big and bad was going to happen. And that's why he was here. He was here to tell us or to warn us that the Silver Bridge was going to collapse.
Okay, I think we're done.
Good. Surely you can get something out of that.
Oh, yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. For more information about our program, or to find out where you can watch the original documentary film or purchase a limited edition signed DVD copy, please visit www.eyesofthemothman.com.